Hello and welcome back to Voyage of a Time Wanderer. Today I am here to share my nonfiction favorites for 2023. So doing my fiction and nonfiction favorites are some of my favorite videos that I do every year. So I am excited to be here today talking about my nonfiction favorites from 2023. However, it is also a little bit sad to look back on my nonfiction reading this year because this was definitely not my best nonfiction reading year. If I look at the stats in Storygraph, it looks like about 19% of my reading was nonfiction, and normally that's closer to 25-26%. So I definitely read less nonfiction than I normally do, and I also had less standout 5-star nonfiction that I could include on this list that I was really passionate about talking about. So I've ended up with 3 nonfiction books that I really was excited to talk about and that were really engrossing 5-star reads for me. So I'm excited to share about those 3, and I'm just wishing that I had had more incredible nonfiction reads in 2023. I think there's a couple of reasons why 2023 wasn't my best nonfiction reading year. I didn't really have an active reading through my family tree project going on in this last year, and so I wasn't prioritizing and picking up social history as much as I do when I had that set TBR related to my family tree. And because social history is one of my very favorite subgenres of nonfiction, I think that my nonfiction reading suffered because I wasn't reading as much social history. And I also decided this year to split off my theological nonfiction and not include it on this favorites list. And so last year I had a couple kind of theology or faith-related nonfiction books that were on my top list, and since I decided not to include them in this video this year, that also shrunk my pool of candidates that I could draw on when coming up with my favorites of the year. That being said, please, 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 I would love to have some nonfiction recommendations in the comments because I'm really hoping to turn around my nonfiction reading in 2024 and have it be a really wonderful year full of nonfiction books so that when I reach this point next year, I have an absolute wealth of books to choose my favorites from. So coming in at number 3, we have a memoir, and that is Counting the Cost by Jill Duggar Dillard. This book features one of the now grown up children from 19 Kids and Counting finally telling her own story on her own terms. If you have ever been involved with or left a high control fundamentalist religious group, and or if you have some strained or tense family relationships, I think this book will really hit hard. There were numerous scenes in this book where Jill was recounting a conversation with a family member or her emotions as she was going through different things, where I could really tangibly feel her anxiety in the pit of my stomach. And it's really clear that over the last 5 years or so, thanks to the work that she has done in therapy and being able to establish boundaries with different family members, that she has really grown into her own. And reading through this memoir really made me want to applaud her for the strength and bravery that she has shown by being ready to share her story with the world. I watched the Duggars show growing up, and then later on followed along with Jill and Derek's married life through ex-Fundy online spaces. So I knew kind of the broad brushstrokes of their story as it had been presented in the TV show and on social media. But this book really goes beyond that into the reality behind reality TV. From Jill's perspective as an adult recounting the negative aspects to growing up on a TV show, this was really fascinating as a glimpse into the future tell-alls I'm sure we will be reading from the children of Instagram influencers and family vloggers. I appreciated both Jill's candor throughout this book as well as the aspects of her life that she decided to continue to keep private. Overall, even though I know this doesn't have great literary merit, I still found it to be a fascinating and heart-touching memoir that gave me new insights not only into Jill's journey from childhood into adulthood, but also into the cult of the IBLP and the dangers of reality TV. My second favorite nonfiction book of 2023 was The In-Between: Unforgettable Encounters in Life's Final Moments by Hadley, Valhos. This is a beautifully written memoir about the author's experiences working as a hospice nurse. I had stumbled across some of Hadley's videos on Instagram, so that is how this book ended up on my radar. In those videos, she was detailing how common it is for people who are near death to see different deceased family members and ancestors coming to visit them, which is an aspect of dying that I have always found very fascinating, especially coming from a perspective of being interested in both genealogy and the afterlife. So when I saw that she had a book coming out, I was very keen to read it. I ended up listening to this on audiobook, which was narrated by Hadley herself, and I always love, if I'm going to read a memoir on audiobook, if it is narrated by the author themselves. I feel like the way that they narrate their own life's experiences adds a little something extra to the listening experience. The In-Between is a moving collection of stories and vignettes of different patients that she has cared for over her years as a hospice nurse, and I found myself tearing up by the end of pretty much every chapter when we reached those patients' final moments. It was definitely a memento mori reminder, but also a very hopeful account of what a good death can look like. It definitely had me considering the kind of end-of-life care that I hope will be available still to me when I reach that stage of life. And then my very favorite nonfiction book of 2023 is The Postcard by Ann Berest. This is a book that I actually got as an e-arc on NetGalley, so I'm very appreciative to the publisher and NetGalley for sending me a copy of this book to read, because it wasn't one that I was aware of previously, and I hate to think that I almost missed out on reading this if I hadn't stumbled across it as an option on NetGalley. This book is kind of a blend between memoir and kind of embellished historical narrative nonfiction. So in 2003, the author's family received a mysterious postcard in the mail with no message on it except for the names of 4 family members who had been killed during the Holocaust. And that is the author's maternal great-grandparents and 2 of their children, so the author's grandmother's siblings and parents. They're obviously kind of unsettled by that, not sure exactly what the sender of the postcard, what message they're trying to convey, and so given that there is no information about the sender, they put it away in a drawer and try to forget about it. 15 years later, the author is now middle-aged and really grappling with how to explain and pass on her Jewish heritage to her young daughter. And so that launches her into a quest trying to better understand her family's story both before and during the Second World War, and hopefully to uncover who sent the postcard and why. The postcard ends up chronicling this investigative journey and perfectly walking the line between historical fiction and narrative nonfiction, as the story jumps between the author and her mother's present-day genealogical research and the constructed story of the lives of her family members from the early 1900s all the way up to the tragic events of the 1940s. As a family historian myself, I loved how the postcard was at its core about how understanding the threads of connection that run from generation to generation is essential to having a rooted identity in the present. Fascinating, haunting, and poignant, this is definitely a book that has stuck with me ever since I read it in early summer this year, and I know it's one that I'm going to continue thinking about and mulling over for a long time to come. I would highly recommend the postcard to anyone who is interested in true accounts of the Second World War and the Holocaust, memoirs that examine the intergenerational impacts of trauma and the burdens inherited from the past, or books about family secrets and memory keeping. Honestly, I think anyone that enjoys really well-written nonfiction that reads like a gripping novel would enjoy this book immensely. So those are my top 3 nonfiction titles of 2023, and I didn't realize until I was speaking through it here on this video that all 3 of them were memoirs, which is interesting. I guess since I didn't read enough social history this year, that is telling me that memoir must be my second favorite subgenre of nonfiction. So I'd be very curious to know what your favorite nonfiction reads of 2023 were, and maybe I can pick up some of those books in 2024. In my next video, I will be sharing all of my fiction favorites of 2023, and I have a lot more books to recommend over on the fiction side, so hopefully you'll check back in the next day or two to see that video as well. Thanks for watching, and until next time, enjoy wandering through the pages of a good book. Bye.